Now we're going across the Hamilton's police station, and this is another direction to get to Techniques Order. And there's the People's Pharmacy on the right. Okay, now we're coming up on Victoria Street. Victoria Street and King Street. We're going to take a left onto King Street. Now we're right at the stop sign. King Street and Dundonald Street. And onto King Street. Now we turn right onto Curvin Avenue. And this is Techniques Order. The cylinder head has been prepared. All the necessary things has been repaired. The stud been refaced, valves grind. So now we're going to start the reassembling of the head and putting back all the pieces. And while we're putting back all the pieces, we're still going to be looking for anything that need to be replaced. So even though we checked everything already, it's still a continuous double check, triple check, just to make sure you don't miss anything. Because one mistake and it can have serious consequence. On a metal bench, and we use this metal bench in the reassemble process because you can maintain it cleaner with less loose stuff hanging on the bench. So, you know, like if you use the wooden bench, it's not good to really fit the engine up. You need to put something on it. But the metal bench have its plus and its minus. One of the things with the metal bench, if you have two metal rubbing against each other, then you know something going to get scratched or damaged. So that's why I have this piece of cardboard where whenever I'm going to rest the head down on the face, then I don't want any metal to metal for it to get scratched or damaged. And remember, I keep speaking about tools and simple things because when you work on many different engine and brand, it requires a whole lot of tools, more than if you're just working on one brand. So you have to have like tools that do multi-purpose. You can't always get tools that just do single purpose. But at the same time, you have to be creative. And if you use an apprentice in the startup stage, it's always difficult with tools and challenging with tools. So that's one of the reasons I consistently showing simple things that you can do and still get the work done correct. So I'm going to just use this piece of cardboard, and whenever I have the head and the face like that, then I have some protection and it don't have any loose material that going to stuck in the engine. As normal, as usual, we want to get some tools that we're going to use for this part of the repair. So we're going to need like the valve spring compressor, screwdriver, maybe a 10 socket. This don't require a whole lot of tools. So we're just going to put in back the valve train, the rocker shaft, the camshaft, all the retainers, springs, all the stuff in the valve train. And remember, the olden tool from in the beginning, it's still here, and the valve them been grind and everything, clean and everything, and the olden tool still working good. And this is what I was explaining from in the beginning, that this tool that we make will keep the valve until the cylinder head is reassembled. So this is the exact same cylinder head that we disassembled, and you could see how the terrible condition it was in. And you see, this is what it looked like in the final preparation. It would look like a brand new cylinder head, but it's not a brand new cylinder head. It's the same cylinder head. And remember this stud that was damaged? It's still in there. We'll leave that one in there because we don't want to get mixed up. It's a slightly taller stud. Just rotate the head, and remember how this surface was all uneven. Now it's machined and have a perfect level surface. These little deterioration, we don't worry about them because it's not anywhere with water going through. Plus the gasket is all sealed in these areas. So this just actually expose water jacket areas where it's not really a big deal. Important is, if you look at the surface of the head, you can see how it's machined, very nice. And in the earlier video I actually demonstrate how the difference, what it was before it cut and what the measurement was after it cut. So now we're going to move to the forward and start assemble everything. We're not going to use that cam gear, you know, this the old cam gear there. But we don't throw away no old parts until the engine is assembled. So the first thing I'm going to do is install the new valve seals. You always need a piece of rag so that you can, you know, consistently keep your hand clean and not oily and, you know, greasy because things slip out your hand. But you want to make sure that you're not using too much of a cotton cloth. You know, you have the right cleaning material to buy, but it's okay if you use a piece of, cloth, long as it's not too silky or too much cotton. You don't want too much cotton because just one thread can make a big problem inside the engine. So you don't want anything we're leaving loose material. Now I'm going to put in the valve seal. And again, we come back to tool again. This is the valve seal here. You have a lot of different valve seal installed tool, but you can use a regular socket. This is just a tube socket, and we want to make sure when the socket go over the seal, it not pressing up against the rubber part of the seal because it can damage it. So it go over and it fit nice and smooth on the metal section of the seal. If you want, you can add an extension to it, but the important, you want to make sure it going in straight when it go in. You don't want it going lean like that or over like that. You want to make sure it going straight. So you have to be very careful because with these seals they come in set, and generally you can't just go and buy a set of valve seal. You have to buy the entire cylinder head kit. So you don't want to damage one of these. The next thing is you're not going to put any oil inside there because you don't want the valve seal sliding off the valve guide. So we want to put it on dry, no form of lubrication. Some valve you can just press it on and it go on nice and smooth. Some you have to give it a slight little tap. So let me put in the first one. And I'll start right here. And see, it go on nice. I didn't have to top it nor anything. And with these valve seal, they are the same size. Some engine, it will carry a sorry, sometimes when you're doing this part of the work, you can't really talk, you have to concentrate. So I'm just making sure the seals go on level. So now I'm just checking the seals to make sure they are in flush. Okay. So the valve seals are in. And now I'm going to install the valves. 2, 3. So now I'm just giving the valve a final clean, and this is just a safety precaution, just in case any valve grinding compound escape and was still there on the valve. We want to make sure no valve grinding compound whatsoever on the valve, because that can damage the valve guide, the valve stand, can cause a lot of problems. And notice I still doing them one by one because now that the valves are grind, can't really mix them up. And the reason you can't mix them up because one, they already worn in an individual way to each valve, to each seat. and then we they they have been grind, refaced, so they still reface in an individual way. If you mix them up now, it definitely would leak. Remember, front of the engine, intake valve, exhaust valve. Now you want to use a little bit of lubricant on the valve stem, and this helps a lot with the first startup before the oil starts to circulate. And you notice I doing them one by one, and I'm going in sequence. Important, you have to just don't mix them up. So now each valve is back in its place, and that's the end of the journey for our valve holding tool. Now we can go in the trash, or we can keep it for another engine, but most time you can see how the holder is expanded a little bit, so it's not really any good for another job. So that's it for this tool. It's finished. Now, because the engine we put in the valve seals actually going to hold the valve in place. So I could actually turn the valve, the head like that now, and the valves won't fall out. I'm going to put in the valve springs. And I have the valve spring retainers. So now the valve springs are in. I'm going to position the head. And the reason I'm putting it like this, because I want to get access to this tool valve. With the valve spring compressor, can go underneath and without being blocked by the workbench. Okay, this tool here is called a valve spring compressor, or valve tool. You have many variations. You have variations specific for this head or this engine. Each manufacturer have one design for their engine. And you have tool manufacturer make the same tool for multiple engines. So this is a universal valve tool. It can do most engine. Very few engine it can't do. Now I'm compressing the valve spring so that I can install the valve clip. These are the clip here. Okay, so that's one valve and with the valve retainer, valve spring and valve clip installed. Now all the valve springs and valve retainer, valve clips, valve seal is in. And now we're going to move to the next stage and put in the camshaft. So we already checked the cam, and most important, from your disassembling the engine, you can see if there's any visual damage to the cam lobes. And we also mic them to make sure at the highest point of the lift they're not worn, because a lot of cam tend to wear in that area. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to lubricate up the cam a little bit. And you always want to use lubrication. Each rotating part you're installing. Now we can put in back the cam. And it rotated nice and smooth. And it's important that all of these parts go back in the right sequence. Come on. Now I'm just putting in these clips that are going to keep the rocker arm in position. I want to make sure it's in good, and you can see where the rocker arm is center with the cam lobe. That's what we want. Okay, something important. Whenever you're assembling the head, you always have to be careful if it's a cylinder head where the camshaft actually have to go in before the head installed to the block, because you're going to have some valve open and some valve closed, and you don't want them to get bent or damaged. So that's why I'm put this two small piece of wood here, just to ease the head up so the valve can open. And for example, I've just installed the clip and retainer to keep this rocker arm in position. But now I need to do this one. But I can't move it because it's on the lift section of the lobe. So I need to put it to turn the cam to the back of the cam lobe. But one of these other valves, for example this one, if I rotate the cam anti-clockwise, then this one going to open. So this valve going to push down. So if it's up against the table, it can bend the valve, it can break the rocker, it can different type of damage can happen. So that's why I have two pieces of wood here, where I just ease up the head just enough for the valves to open. Now I'm just putting some thread lock on the bolt. Don't really want it loosen up. So these bolts here, normally have to lock them. Before I put the cam in without the rocker shaft and arm, just to check the sideway truss, make sure the cam didn't have any too much play or incorrect play, sideway play. And that's fine, so that's why I have to take back out the nut so that we could install the rocker shafts. But now I'm locking it permanently, so these will never open on their own. Somebody has to open them for them to release. Okay, so that's the cylinder head with the valve train installed. Looking nice. Now I'm just going to adjust the valves so that this area of the repair complete. Now I'm going to adjust the valves, and for this part of the work we just have some basic tool that's needed. Just need a 10 spanner, a feeler gauge, and for these adjuster you can either use a small Allen key to fit in the eccentric, or you can just get a piece of welding rod and cut it. Other than the tool, you normally need to have the correct specification. So if you don't know the specification, it's best not to try and guess it. A lot of mechanics try and just use a measurement they think that will work for the valve clearance. Before we even put it, you have to always take care of the book. You don't want to get messed up. What I'm looking for here is just the valve clearance specification, and you can clearly see right there, M10 engine, valve clearance, intake and exhaust, and for the engine code, M10 engine, and it's 0.20 millimeter. That's basically 8 thou. And that's when it's cold. When it's hot, then it's a different measurement, 0.25 millimeter. One of the reasons, the main reason why you have two different clearance is when the engine gets hot, the metal expand, and when it expands, it means it gets larger, so there's less clearance between the two moves, between the valve and the rocker arm eccentric. So for that reason, if it's cool, you have to use a different measurement, and if it's hot, a different measurement. So right now the engine is disassembled, so it's obviously cold, so we're going to go with the 0.20 millimeter. And we'll just look for it. I'll just look for it in the feeler gauge here. This is what we're looking for here. 0.20 millimeter or 8 thou. And with this engine, both the exhaust and intake get the same, use the same measurement, the same valve clearance. Now I'm going to put in the studs, and remember we did have some problem with 1 or 2 studs when the engine was disassembling. So now we're going to put in the stud, make sure all the studs them locking up nice. Now I'm going to install the stud for the exhaust manifold. And remember, we repaired this in one of the earlier video and we clear all the threading. So now I'm going to put in the stud, but if you notice, there's nothing for the spanner to fit. So we're going to actually I'm going to use this 2 nut, put 1 nut, and then I'm going to use a locking nut.